Here we have another one of these underlined portion questions. So we got to read everything, but let's make sure we stay focused on the underlined portion. It's not very long in this case. Scholarly accounts of the Chicano movement, a movement that advocated for the social, political, and cultural empowerment of Mexican Americans and reached its zenith in the 1960s and 70s, tend to focus on the most militant, outspoken figures in the movement. Okay, so they focus on something, making it seem uniformly radical. Geographer Juan Herrera has shown, however, that if we shift our focus toward the way the movement manifested in comparatively low-profile neighborhood institutions and projects, we see participants espousing an array of political orientations and approaches to community activism. This one is much harder. Okay, so this has got a lot of tough vocabulary in the passage. We don't have a lot to go on because the underlined portion is so short. But notice what I highlighted, right? It's about, so they focus on something, some sort of, militant, outspoken figures. The first sentence there is kind of just a long description of what the Chicano movement is. So let's just kind of go to our choices at this point and see what we get. A, it presents a trend in scholarship on the Chicano movement. Okay, well, just breaking it down, that might be okay, right? If you focus on something, if people tend to focus on something, right? Scholarly accounts, and maybe we should highlight that too, right? Scholarly accounts tend to focus on the most militant, outspoken figures in the movement. So that sounds like a trend. They tend to do something, that's a trend. That the text claims has been reevaluated by researchers in light of Herrera's work on the movement's participants. So this is sneaky. They're telling us to focus on the underlined portion, but that half of that choice requires us to understand what else is going on. So for now, I would just leave it and be like, okay, it sounds like a trend. Maybe that's all I need for this passage. I don't know what else is going on, but the underlined portion sounds like it is describing a trend. Let's just move on. B, it identifies an aspect of the Chicano movement that the text implies was overemphasized by scholars due to their own political orientations. So this is definitely a very strong word, and it scares me a little bit because in the underlined portion, it doesn't necessarily say it's overemphasized. Maybe later it does. I don't know, because if it's focusing on something, it's emphasizing it. So whether it's overemphasizing it, maybe too strong, but I don't know. I don't know enough about what else was happening in this passage to kind of really be certain about that. C, it describes a common approach, that also sounds like a trend, to studying the Chicano movement that, according to the text, obscures the ideological diversity of the movement's participants. D, it summarizes the conventional method for analyzing the Chicano movement, which the text suggests creates a misleading impression of the effectiveness of neighborhood institutions and projects. So this happens sometimes, right? I was really hoping that I'd be able to just get rid of all the choices, or at least two of them, based on this idea of like it focuses on something, but it doesn't really work. But if we look at these choices a little bit more deeply, we start to see some sort of connotations, right? So A, it presents a trend that has been reevaluated, right? So maybe that's kind of like a positive or neutral tone, right? Just it's reevaluated. It doesn't mean that, it was wrong necessarily or anything like that. It's just, I don't know, we're looking at it again. B, though, overemphasized, definitely has that negative aspect. C, we have obscures the ideological diversity of the movement's participants. If something is obscured, it's hidden, it's kind of kept out of view. So that sounds bad. It sounds like we're ignoring something. And then D, it summarizes the method, which the text creates a misleading impression. Right, so now let's go back. We might be able to either eliminate B, C, and D, or pick A, or eliminate A, depending on the connotation here. So scholarly accounts tend to focus on the most militant, outspoken figures in the movement, making it seem uniformly radical. Okay, it seems radical, but maybe it's not. Geographer Juan Herrera has shown, however, so we get a little bit of a contrast, that if we shift our focus toward the way the movement manifested in comparatively low-profile neighborhood institutions and projects, that's hard to understand, we see participants are espousing an array of political orientations and approaches. Okay, right? So, in fact, let me even highlight here, right? It seems uniform, but it's actually maybe diverse, an array of political orientations and approaches, right? Array means kind of like a variety. So that seems like we have some sort of contrast. Let's go back to our choices. I don't know if that's positive or negative, to be honest. It sounds like we're describing it in a negative way originally, and now we have a more positive view later. So that makes me skeptical of A, but let's just double check here. It presents a trend in scholarship, blah, 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 that has been reevaluated by researchers in light of Herrera's work on the movement's participants. Well, Herrera's work has certainly changed things, but maybe only for Herrera, right? Does it say that other people, other researchers have also reevaluated things? It doesn't say that. Herrera says that we should shift our focus, but it doesn't say other people agree with him. So this is bringing in people who are not involved, right? So this might be true, but I have no evidence of this. I really need to have other researchers involved here. So this is almost like what we would normally think of as a main character trap. It's switching the main character from Herrera or the current conventional view to what other people now think, and that just isn't talked about. B, it identifies an aspect that the text implies was overemphasized by scholars due to their political orientations. Well, this is similar. Right? Is it really about the scholars making a mistake? I don't think so, especially because it's not about the scholars' political views. I could turn that into a simpler question. What did the scholars believe? I don't know. It tends to focus on these militant, outspoken figures, but it doesn't say anything about why we focus on that. It doesn't say we focus on that because of biases in the scholarship and in what the researchers themselves think. So again, this is switching the main character. It's shifting the focus to something else that isn't there. C, it describes a common approach, that according to the text, obscures the ideological diversity of the movement's participants. Wow, that really does it for me, right? You know why? Because that's a very strong word. And it's a word that has a clear connection to what we have later, an array of political orientations and approaches, right? What are the strong words that they're saying about these Chicano leaders, I guess? They're talking about they're either uniformly radical, right? They have just kind of very strong, consistent beliefs, or they have an array of approaches, right? It's about diversity versus the lack of diversity, right? That's the strong words. That's the dumb summary version of what's going on. Now, C is bringing in that magic word that relates back to that idea. So that's really reassuring. Let's look at D, though. Let's make sure. It summarizes the conventional method, which the text suggests creates a misleading impression of the effectiveness of neighborhood institutions and projects. Well, notice we never actually get anything that says that they're effective. It just says that they used different approaches, focusing on community activism, which I assume would be institutions and projects in the neighborhood. But it doesn't say whether or not they were effective or not. It doesn't say that they somehow were lying about how effective they are. So that piece isn't there. C is hard. And maybe some of you got this much faster than I did, because maybe you just noticed that word diversity really quickly. Maybe as you were reading this passage, you kind of noticed that the main piece of the passage was about it being uniform versus it having an array of views, right? A variety of views. But for me, that didn't stand out immediately because I stayed focused on what I was told. Right? And I think that's the right approach. It's okay to kind of like slowly deviate from what they asked, but I think you want to start with just like giving them what they wanted. They said focus on the underlying portion, right? So that's where I focused. And that did not say anything about being uniform or diverse. That part came later. The SAT just kind of found an annoying way to ask about the main idea of the entire passage using this kind of structure of underlined parts. So just be careful. But, normally this doesn't happen. I would say this is a very big exception to the way that these questions normally are, but that's why with the SAT, we have to be flexible. We have to be ready to kind of pounce on any sort of change that they make. They are consistent most of the time, but yeah, there will be weird questions, and so you've got to adapt to whatever the weird situations are.